What I haven't done yet in my page is actually define anything for the fonts as far as sizing and font family and all that goes. And I definitely want to do that. So let me get started. The first thing that I want to think about is actually a font family. And I know that that's in order to stay within that web safe area and to get consistent cross browser results, you want to go with a good font stack. So um, I'm just going to Google font stack and see what I kind of come up with. And I know there's plenty of articles out there that give you some really cool choices that you could always use. So I'm not one to reinvent the wheel. I kind of like to always look things up and see what everybody else is doing and whether or not it's even going to work for me. And here's some of the things I know already is that I know I want a sans serif font. I don't necessarily need the uh, those little serifs at the end of my text. I kind of like this sans serif better. I think it'll be a little more fitting for the style of my page anyway. And but even beyond that, I think that there's going to be an issue with me sizing these fonts too. How am I actually going to size them? So let's see, this font family. Let's see how this looks. This is that. Let me give this one a try. This is the article that I found before its site point. What I like about it is that it kind of gives me different. It gives me the font stack, and then it gives me what they all look like. So I think I'm going to choose this one, which is again, like I said, a sans serif. And if I go into my style sheet, I'm going to put that font family in my body element or my body slash HTML element over here. And I'll give it a save and let's see what this does for me. So here's what it looks like by default, and once I refresh it, okay, that's actually pretty cool. I definitely like that. I'm thinking I could move this navigation menu. I'd like to move it up a little bit too. So um, let me try to do that. Let's see what possibly could be causing this. Maybe some padding on my actual main content div. So let me look at what my main content has to say. Yeah, main content padding. Everything has a padding of 10. I guess that's okay for the left, right, and bottom, but the top I want it to have maybe, I don't know, something less. So I'll say 2 pixels, and then that's top, right. Well, let me just go all the way through now, because since I wanted to find just one unique value. Okay, and that raised it up a little bit. Could probably even raise them up a bit more well, no, let me give it a padding of 0 and see what that gives me. Okay, that does take it up a notch. And possibly, if I want to raise it up even more, I could actually go to the UL itself, and I have it floating right, and I wonder if I could do margin top and try to give it a, let me see what 0 does. Zeroed out first. There we go. Had some default margin up there anyway. So, okay. Well, that works for me. So now that's a little bit better. And I actually don't have too much content over here. And of course, this Zoho form I can't actually style through my own internal web external CSS file. I'm going to have to go to Zoho myself and change that. So that's something I could definitely do down the road. But I guess if nothing else, I'll want to figure out a way to size these fonts. And what I mean is, what's a good size, pixel value, or point value, or M value, or percentage value, all those options you have with CSS to choose when we're building a new site? Well, let's start by considering that almost all the popular browsers now, Firefox, Chrome, Safari, Internet Explorer, they by default come with a font size of 16. So if you don't do anything, it's going to size stuff at 16. Now, as you see, obviously my header is a bit larger than 16, but that's because there's default CSS styles that the browser implements on certain elements like the header, and it makes it a little bit bigger and bold than everything. Because if I change the header over here, I could change, define that to have a font weight of normal, and then it's not going to be as bold anymore. So there are styles coming into play. Um, anyway, with that said, so I have a font size of 16 as my baseline. I could assume that for in the high 90th percentiles, most of my users have not changed their values, and that's what they're seeing. And the reason why that's important is because you basically have two directions you could go in when styling all your when sizing your fonts. You could either go with pixel values, which pixel values are very precise, and they're great, and you could really get pixel perfect, sizing if you want. But when you define certain elements to be of a certain pixel size, and they're kind of floating on their own, meaning that if you define, let's say, 20 pixels for this header, then well, I mean, you're going to get a 20 pixel header, but if you actually thought that header, if you thought of it in relation to all of the other elements, then you'd actually have to go and change the sizing of all the other elements. Now, if everything was tied together in sizing, like you said, this needs to be, half as small as the header, or, 3/4 the size of the table elements, well, then you could use something called relative sizing. And you do relative sizing by using either percentages or M values. Now, there's a great article over at CSStricks.com on this topic, on some of the pros and cons of all the different methods of sizing fonts. And in short, he covers pixels, M values, percentages, and points. Now, to be clear, points shouldn't be used for styling for the screen. Points is a value that you would only use for your printer style sheets. So essentially, you only really have, and keywords. So essentially, you have four different values. The pixel value is an absolute value that you could give onto an element, and the M's, percentages, and keywords are relative values relative to, well, actually the default font size. And if we think of it like the default font size being 16 pixels, then you'd say 100% of 16 pixels is 16 pixels, but if you do 200% of that, it'd be 32 pixels. And M's kind of functions in the same way, although there's a bit of a debate on how accurate that is. An M, from what I understand, historically meant it's the size of an uppercase M, and I think it's covered in this article right here, just that that's what an M is supposed to be. But I guess one of the issues is that it doesn't directly translate. Like if you say two EMs of something, it may not actually be twice that size exactly. So, needless to say, the point of this story is that when you are working with your fonts, that's the first consideration that you should really have. How am I going to size these things? Relative to each other, or each one has to have its own absolute value? There's pros and cons to either method you choose. The pro of the pixel approach is that you get to say exactly what you want and it'll come out that way. The con is that now if you change one element and it was kind of in relative to something else, you have to change each element individually at that point. Using a relative sizing values, you could actually by changing one value, you kind of change them all, for example, or you change the whole relationship between them all. And I think the approach I'm going to use M's, because M's are pretty dynamic in the sense that not only can they be used to define the size of my text, but I could also use it to define the size of my widths and things like that. So currently I have this set to 40 EMs width. So if I change the size of my text, it will also change the size of my box, which is a behavior that I like and I'm going to go with. So I'm going to do just that. I'm going to start sizing all of my fonts with M's.